Hi everyone, sorry, I think that I am a minute late. This week I needed to sequester my dogs because my English Bull Terrier, Jax, who is just pure muscle, I thought was going to take down our camera last week. So I prepared a little bit better this week, and he and my 12-year-old beagle, Baxter, are in their room snuggling. So they're not going to take down our Facebook town hall tonight. Welcome to my second Facebook town hall. Thanks for joining me. I'm super excited to be here with you guys again. As I mentioned last week, we're going to be doing this every Wednesday moving forward, as well as when I get to Washington, because I think it's so important that I hear straight from you what's on your mind, what's going on in our community, what issues are important to you. I do want to tell you guys a little bit about my week. This past week we had a long weekend, which is usually a good thing. It was just extra long and full of fun and work for me. But really it was a great weekend to remember, honor, and really celebrate our men and women who have sacrificed everything for our country. If you had a chance to check out my Facebook page, there was also an article about my Uncle Art Guzman, who every year does a memorial. He was a Vietnam veteran, and I've never met a man who loved his country so openly and sorry about that, someone was calling me. Like my uncle, he was a Vietnam War veteran, and if you guys have a chance to look at my web page, my Facebook page, and you can see the article that was written about him in the San Fernando Sun. He loves his country and he loves God. He's a pastor, and he has a really unique story. He was in Vietnam, and he was sent one day to the lines at like 1 a.m. To go help defend the line. They were still getting a lot of sniper shots, and he was sitting there all night talking to and praying with a man and a couple, and preaching the word. I can imagine that's what I would definitely lean on if I were in any type of battle or war like that, is I'd lean on my faith. But he was preaching about he was preaching to him, and a couple weeks later the man came up to him and said, thank you so much for talking to me, for praying with me that night. I'm not sure that it prevented me from letting go of the grenade. There was a pin that he actually pulled, and my uncle had no idea that he had literally saved this man's life, led him to Christ, and saved his own life. So it's truly an inspirational story that I've been lucky to have known for a long time. But check out the article, really awesome article. So I see we have quite a few people that have joined on. Before we get into your questions, I have been advertising this kind of all over my social media platforms, including Twitter. And I do have a question from Twitter that I'll get to in a second. But I also want to mention that 2 weeks ago, I was really lucky to have participated in Endeavor Middle School's career day right here in the Antelope Valley, and specifically in Miss Toll's classroom. Miss Toll's is a history teacher. She teaches 7th and 8th grade history, and she loves the Constitution, and she is teaching our 7th and 8th graders their civic responsibility and role to vote when they turn 18. So I had a really amazing time talking to them, and they sent me this cool little certificate. So I'm super excited. I think it's kind of flipped right here, but it's the small things that really do mean the most to me. So the Twitter, let me pull up in my email here. Actually my Twitter account here, maybe if it wants to work with me today. There was a really good question around education. Of course, my Twitter account is going to, it's going to take its time on with me today. All right, so I'll just kind of sum up what the question was. It was from Mr. CR Poetry on Twitter, and he asked me how I feel about education in California. He asked me specifically how I feel about the way education funding in California is, the way it works, and whether or not I agree with it, specifically local funding control formula, or the way that California allocates its funds, and it's based on a variety of things. And it really truly is a question for the state legislature. But it kind of brings me around to one of my passions, which is education. Which is specifically all education, but I've been an early education advocate for years now. One of my first experiences was when my niece was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. She received early intervention services. And for a lot of 4-year-olds entering preschool, it's actually the first time they are day in and day out with somebody who understands early childhood development and somebody who can help recognize and identify some developmental delays. Now, with early childhood education, with access to early intervention services, with early diagnosis of early learning or developmental disabilities, the sooner you can do intervention, the better quality of life the child will have. So I became a huge believer in ensuring that every child has access to affordable early learning opportunities, specifically preschool, but really in that 0 to 5 realm. We've learned so much about early education and about the social and emotional development that happens from the 0 to 5 years. And even on the flip side, as we're now, businesses are now talking about emotional intelligence, some of those things that we learned really early, like how to share, how to sit down and take direction, some of those soft skills that we use in everyday life that make us effective team members in the workplace are the very skills that our 0 to 5 and our preschoolers are learning, which is why my job as a CEO at Little Steps of Preschool, I'm very passionate about. My mom actually opened up this nonprofit preschool back in 2014, and last year after she passed away, I was more than willing to take on the role of CEO to ensure that not only her legacy would continue, but to also ensure that children have access to a quality early learning experience, and that ultimately gets them ready for kindergarten. So that's the early education aspect of it. And at the federal level, I support, and I believe that there are opportunities for us to support early learning, including things like competitive block grants that would increase funding to improve the quality of early learning, and actually also keep that 0 to 5 early learning age group in that 0 to 5 early learning age group. I think that now let's flip over to the K through 12 system. I am a huge supporter of K through 12. I was a product of public school, but also my public school experience was pretty much driven, my success and actually of graduating college was driven through the values my parents taught me, right? My high school dropout rate was upwards of 50% when I graduated high school. And there were schools that were failing people in my community. And that's why now we see a lot of growth in the charter school system, because parents are demanding that if their children are not going to have access to quality learning, that they're going to do something about it, and they're going to send their children and seek out charter schools, which is why we've seen growth in charter schools. I'm a true believer that when you insert competition into anything, specifically and especially education, that it's beneficial. And the same thing for higher education. Again, when we insert competition, it drives down cost and improves quality, and we need that at all levels of education for our students nowadays. That's a really long answer. I'm sorry about that. I happen to be super passionate about education. I could probably spend a whole town hall talking to you guys about education and some of my ideas on what we can do at the federal level. While I do still, mind you, I still really believe and support that that giving control and power to local government is the best way in improving we have quality systems in education. So I have a few questions here. I have one question at least. How can we fix education? Do you have any? Well, I just answered that question a little bit there, didn't I? And if you have anything, Christian, Valente. If you have anything additional or specific you'd like me to answer, please let me know. But I just kind of gave an overall viewpoint of that, and maybe we can consider doing a longer education town hall. That would be really fun. So Anthony, can you explain how your background translates to being an effective lawmaker in Congress? So, well, first of all, you'd have to know a little bit about my background. So I have been really fortunate to have spent my professional career supporting individuals and causes that I'm passionate about. So I got involved in politics when I was on the campaign side and started campaigning at a super young age. I think I was 18 years old when I volunteered on my first campaign. And they're probably gonna hate me for saying this, but one of my first campaigns, I volunteered for Tony Cardenas, who was running for city council. He is a nonpartisan race, but we know that he happens to be a Democrat. And I learned so much about the political process. I knew then I was Republican, and it kind of validated it even more. But I was really just hungry to learn more about the campaign process. So that was my first experience in politics and supporting an individual that I believed in at the time. Then I was really fortunate to have been picked up to work for Congressman Buck McKeon in his office, and really fell in love with the 25th Congressional District, with the business community, with the advocacy communities. It was just an all-around amazing experience. At the same time, my niece was diagnosed as severely developmentally delayed. She was nonverbal and on the autism spectrum. And again, her early intervention services made me a huge advocate for early intervention and making sure that all children had access to early intervention and diagnosis. And that's when I started working for Los Angeles Universal Preschool. I was with them, and I worked with them in government affairs and public affairs. I advocated for early learning funding, for policy change in Sacramento, in Washington, with the White House, with the Department of Education, really fighting for raising awareness and access to early learning. I was then fortunate enough to also have worked as executive director over at Autism Speaks, where I did some of the very same things. And in all of those experiences, advocating for the special needs community, whether it was healthcare, policy change, making sure that insurance agencies would allow them to have access to ABA or pay for ABA therapies, which is very important to individuals on the spectrum, a lot of individuals on the spectrum. These are nonpartisan issues. They affect Republicans, they affect Democrats, they affect Libertarian, Greenpeace, they affect everyday Americans. And that experience, working on both sides of the aisle, working with a different administration, working in Sacramento, working in the community, has given me true perspective as to what the needs, what people want, and what the needs of certain communities are. And my approach is to stay true to my values, and I'm most creative because I think I'm a free market, limited government type of conservative. But I also understand, to get any good legislation passed, you have to put differences aside and come to the table and work across the aisle to get things done. And that doesn't mean you compromise your values, but that means that you sit there respectfully and you talk about the issues. And I think that's a lot of my experience and my background has really prepared me to work across the aisle, but to also stand my ground, be aggressive when I need to be aggressive, when I really believe in something, and to ultimately fight for what's right, to fight for our values. So that's the long way about it, but I think my entire professional career has prepared me to really speak up for the people. Okay, good question. I'm going in order here, but so Anthony, what are your priorities for the district? So first of all, I do have priorities, and I do have things that are important to me: healthcare, immigration reform, education, in our community, aerospace and defense, infrastructure. These are all issues that are very important to me. But over the next, I guess now 8 months, 10 months, or actually really in the general too, I'm going to be spending time in the community, listening to what is important to you and what is important to the constituents that live in the 25th Congressional District. We need somebody who's really and consistently in tune to what the district wants and what the district needs, and really listens to their constituency. So those are my priorities, but I mean, this is a perfect forum. If you have things that aren't on that short list, and not that I don't have a long list, on that short list, I'd love to know what they are. So please feel free to tell me what you think our priorities should be. Welcome, Brittany. Christian, what is your position on school choice? Is there a solution that at the federal level, is there a solution for that at the federal level? And should that stay at the state level? So I think that there is definitely, I'm a supporter of school choice. I think, again, when you allow for competition into a market, and education is a market, it is an industry, it lowers the cost and improves quality. I know that it is a very controversial issue. I know that when Congressman Klein, who was a former chairman of the education committee back when I was advocating in 2012 and 11 or 12 through I think 14, had really wanted at the federal level to open up access to vouchers and choice. And it's something that at the time, whether there wasn't an appetite for it or the numbers to get it passed, I think it's something that could definitely be revisited. I think I, again, am always for empowering the local at the local level and at the state level. So I think that states and even school districts need to have the power to make some of those decisions. I think there is a role for the government to play, and it could be, again, something like competitive block grants that would support the growth of choice, that would support charter schools or a voucher program. So I think there is solutions, but it should not be dominated at the federal level. Who do we have here next? My Theo is on. Thanks for joining. Kelly Rivas. Why do you think you can beat Katie Hill? What makes you different from other Republican candidates? So for 2 questions, those are 2 for there. The first question is, why do I think that I can beat Katie Hill? Ultimately, I represent our community's values, and which is a stark contrast to Katie Hill. And she was elected on the facade that she was going to represent our community's values, that she was a moderate who would fight for our district. And she is far from that. Some of you may have seen recent articles, and it was either Political or Roll Call, where she is literally Nancy Pelosi's protege. Every single vote, in specifically important votes like HR 1 or HR 8, or even the government shutdown 3 days into her being in office, she has voted and vocally been all over the place supporting the progressive left-wing agenda. And so I think that, first of all, the district is going to vote for me because they want somebody who represents their values and commits to their promises, which is not what she has been doing. That's not to say that this is going to be an easy race. It's going to be a top 10 targeted race. We do need, it's not just about having good ideas, as much as I would love it to be about just having good ideas and representing the values of the district. We as activists, we as community members have to come together and solidify around a candidate now in order to truly beat Katie Hill in November of 2020. That means that you guys are going to have to volunteer. You're going to have to help knock on doors, make phone calls. We're going to have to raise money. There is a slew of things that we need to do. We need to organize, and we need to be more vocal than we ever have in order to win this seat. I have the passion to do that. I think our community has a passion to do that. We want somebody who represents and accomplishes and passes legislation that affects this district. So that's part of the other reason why I think that we're going to beat Katie Hill, or I know we're going to beat Katie Hill, is because this community wants a representative that understands their values. Now, the second part of that question, because I was long-winded there, was I think, what makes you different from other Republican candidates? My dogs went out. I think there's a lot that makes me different. I think that, I don't fit the typical Republican profile. And I'm not even just talking about the so-called, identity politics, which I know the left hates that a young, conservative, Latina female mother identifies as a conservative Republican, right? They absolutely hate that because I destroy their narrative, right? But I'm not even talking about the identity politics and not fitting the typical Republican profile. What I mean is that I'm a modern Republican that has championed modern issues that Republicans haven't typically championed, like early education, like being an advocate for the autism community. These are things that completely separate me from the other candidates who come from traditional Republican backgrounds, from banking and finance, from God love him, from the veteran community, which is an important part of our community. But again, my experience and who I am doesn't traditionally fit that Republican profile. And I just honestly bring a different perspective to the table. Everything from the fact that I love to tell stories, which we know is not typically a Republican thing. Republicans like to talk about numbers, facts, and data. And not that I'm a little geeky and I don't like those things, but I like to tell stories because I think people relate to stories. And that's how I learned. I love stories. I love hearing about stories about my past and my family and my community and my neighbors and my friends. So a different perspective. I'm not the typical Republican. Good question, Kelly. Gayla. Hi, Gayla. It's good to see you. How can you get legislation passed to get pharmaceutical drugs at lower prices? This is a really good question. And it's actually, it's a part of the overall healthcare issue right now, right? Is healthcare costs and pharmaceutical costs are exorbitant. And I think we need a true solution. We need to be able to drive competition into the market. I think there are things that we can do legislatively. And mind you, I do not like regulation. I think that it stifles businesses, but certain industries we should have some serious regulation. So whether it's ensuring that when pharmaceuticals, whether it's ensuring that, so there's a process in the pharmaceutical industry where you patent a pill, but it can only stay, but that formula can only stay. They can only essentially own that patent for a certain amount of time, and then that expires. Well, sometimes they'll put in extension after extension after extension, or change the formula very slightly so they can continue to have that patent. That's something that we need to look at because that's one of the many things that is keeping the cost so high. In terms of passing and how we can get legislation passed, well, we need to bring in ideas that are going to allow pharmaceutical companies to make their profit, but that aren't going to jeopardize generic forms of prescriptions, that aren't going to jeopardize or stifle pharmaceutical companies from wanting to find new drugs. And in terms of passing legislation, we need to put partisan politics aside and get this done for the American people. And that's not just with the pharmaceutical industry. That's with healthcare across the board. I do have lots of ideas. Again, another possibly really good, topic for one town hall, because healthcare is such a huge topic, and I do have a lot of ideas like HARPA that I think can bring down the cost of healthcare overall. Michelle, yes, caring. Okay, did I see another one? Importing from other countries. So Gila, do you want to, are you asking if I think that we should allow, if this is still on your pharmaceuticals question. Do I think we should allow for importing from other countries? Absolutely, as long as there's still a process where we can ensure that they meet our standards. Again, I'm a free market, limited government conservative, and I wouldn't have a problem with that at all, as long as they do meet our standards. All right, guys, I have time for one more question because it is, oh wow, time flies when you're having fun. I have time for one more question before it is time for me to go be mama and get Charlotte ready for her bath and all of that fun nighttime routine. Thanks, Gayla. All right, I think I answered all of them though. So good questions, guys. Really good questions. Thank you for joining me tonight. Again, I'll be doing this every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Literally welcoming you to my kitchen table to talk about the kitchen table issues that are important to you. Please feel free to submit questions to me throughout the week on Twitter, Instagram. You can follow me. You can visit my website to also learn more about some of my positions at www.SuzetteValladares.com. And I will see you next week. Same bat time, same bat cave. Is that the slogan? Talk to you guys soon. Thanks.